Hello, everybody. Welcome to another story time from the Milledgeville Public Library. Today, we have a story. Let me get this camera in the right place so you can actually see me well. There we go. Now it's in the right place. Well, the library's still doing well, and the stuffed animals haven't destroyed anything yet, so we're good. We're going to tell a story today. This story is a German story. It's called Hans and the Little Iron Man. Once, long time ago, there was a king. He was a good king. He had a good kingdom with happy people and lots of money and lots of food and a big palace to live in. But he wasn't a happy king. He wasn't happy for one reason. He had one child, his beloved daughter, the princess of the kingdom, and she was very, very sick. She just laid there on her bed all day long. She couldn't move. She didn't talk. He was very worried about her. He was afraid she was going to die. And so he sent for all of the best doctors in all of the lands, asking them to come and to look at his daughter and to see if they could find out what was wrong with her. And they all came, and they all looked at her, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong or how to fix it. Well, eventually, an old, wise man of medicine came from a country far to the east, and he said to the king, "I have seen this before. The princess must eat a very special apple. You will know it when you find it." And then the old man left. And the king sent out a proclamation. That means he sent out a big announcement to the whole country that said, "Whoever brings my daughter the special apple that heals her will win her hand in marriage. He can marry her, and he will be king after I die." Well, as you can imagine, there were a lot of people who wanted to be king and wanted to marry the princess because she was a very pretty princess. But not so many people had very special apples. So a few people tried their apples, but none of them seemed to work for the princess. Well, finally, the news reached one particular part of the kingdom where a farmer lived with a very fine orchard. In fact, everyone always told him his apples were the best apples in the entire kingdom. Well, he heard about the proclamation, and he had sons. So he said to his oldest son, "You get a basket of apples from the orchard, and you take it to the palace, and perhaps your apples will cure the princess, and you can be the next king." And his son said, "Well, I would like that very much. Yes, I would. All right, I will go tomorrow morning, father." And in the morning, he went out to the orchard, and he picked a bunch of apples, and he put them in the basket, and he covered them up so they wouldn't get dusty on the road, and he walked down to the palace. Well, about halfway there, he passed through a little woods. And as he was going through the woods, this little man stepped out from the road in front of him. A very small man, and a very odd-looking man. He wasn't ugly exactly, but he was all entirely the color of iron, kind of a rusty brown color. Entirely. His hair, his clothes, his face, his hands, everything was iron-colored. And the eldest son thought, "It's a very ugly person. Where did he get his fashion sense?" And he just kept walking. The little iron man said, "Excuse me, what's in your basket?" And the son said, "None of your business. Frog's legs." And he walked on to the palace. And when he arrived at the palace, he went up to the guards and he said, "I have the apples that will cure the princess." And they said, "Oh, really?" And he said, "Yes." And so they took him into the king very, very excitedly. Well, the king was very excited too. And he said, "Oh, you have the apple. Let me see the apples that will cure my daughter." And so the son pulled off the cloth, and the basket was full of frog's legs. Some of them were still wiggling. And the king said, "Those aren't apples, those are frog's legs. Throw him out." And so the guards picked up the son and they threw him out the door and he landed on his head. Ouch! And he went home and he told his father what happened. His father said, well, I have another son. He will have to try, your brother will have to try in the morning. So in the morning, the second son was kind of actually a little bit happy, just a little bit happy that his brother had failed. He went out to the orchard with his basket, and he filled his basket with apples, and he covered it up with a cloth, and he took it off to the palace. And as he was walking through the woods, the little iron man stepped out on the road, and he said, what's in your basket? And the young man said, none of your business. Hog's bristles. That's the spiky stuff that's on a pig. And the iron man said, so it is, and so shall it be. And the young man scoffed, whatever, and walked down the road to the palace. When he got to the palace, he said, I have a basket of the apples that will cure the princess. And they said, oh, really? Somebody came yesterday and said the same thing, and he didn't do so well. You sure you want to try? He said, well, I definitely want to try. I know my apples will cure the princess. So they took him into the king. And when they got to the king said, oh, you have the apples that will cure my daughter, do you? Well, let's see these wonderful apples. Oh, yes, of course. And he pulled the cover off the basket, and the entire basket was filled with hog's bristles, the rough, spiky stuff off of a pig. And the king said, those aren't apples. Those are spiky things. I don't even know what those are called. Throw him out. And so they picked him up and they threw him out of the palace and he landed on his head. Ouch! When he got home, he told his father and his brother what had happened. And his father said, well, I guess that's that. I don't have any more sons to send. And a voice from behind him said, I'm here, father. And when they turned around, they saw the farmer's youngest son, Hans. Somehow, everyone always seemed to forget about Hans, even his father and brothers. And his father looked at him and said, my two big, strong, handsome sons, clever too, couldn't figure this out. I highly doubt you can, Hans. Well, but father, I'd really like to try, and if I fail, it would just give you something to laugh at me about. Please, can I try? No, you can't try. The next day, Hans went back to his father and said, Father, please, can I try? No, you can't try. And the next day, Father, please, can I try? Oh, fine! Hans, you're such a pest. Go! So Hans went out to the orchard, and he climbed up into the apple trees, and he picked the best, the juiciest looking, the most perfect rosy red apples he could find, and he carefully put them in that basket, and he covered them up with a cloth, and he started off down the road to the palace. And when he got out into the woods, the little iron man stepped out in front of him, and he said, what you got in the basket? And Hans said, well, I have apples. I picked the best apples from my father's orchard, and I'm taking them to the palace, and I'm hoping I have the right apple in here to cure the princess, because she's been sick for a really long time, and it's not fun to be sick, and I want to cure her. I want her to feel better, and maybe the king said if I can make her feel better, then I can marry the princess, and I can maybe be the king. I don't know if I can be a good king, but I'll try. And the little iron man said, so it is, and so shall it be. And Hans said, well, thank you. Thank you very much. Goodbye. And he walked off back down to the palace. When he got to the palace, he came up and he said, I have some apples here. I hope I have the right one to cure the princess. Could I give them to you? And the guard said, there were two other guys who came up here and tried to give the king apples, and he threw them out on their ear. Are you sure you want to try? He said, well, they're good apples. I eat them all the time, and I really want to make the princess feel better. Maybe could I try? And they said, well, you have a good, honest face. And You don't seem like those other two scoundrels that came here before. So, yeah, you can go inside and go give your apples to the king. Wait, I give them to the king myself. Okay. And so he went in and he brought in the apples and they said, what are you doing here? And he said, well, I brought some apples that maybe could make the princess feel better. Maybe. They said, let's see these fancy apples. They didn't believe him anymore. He took the lid off. And instead of the beautiful rosy red apples that he had put in that basket, all of the apples in the basket were shiny and golden and looked absolutely delicious. And the king said, quickly, take this basket to my daughter, the princess, and see if these apples will cure her. And so they took the basket to the princess, and they made Hans stay right there in the throne room in front of the king and all the guards, and Hans was a little scared of that. But he stood there. And he hoped that the princess would feel better when she ate his apples. And a little while later, the door opened, and in walked the princess herself. Hans's apples had healed her. And the king was so excited. Oh, my daughter is better. Oh, I will make sure that you get lots of money. And Hans said, well, excuse me, king, but your majesty, you said that I could marry the princess and maybe be king after you, and I don't know if I'll be a good one, but I'd like to try. And the king looked him up and down, and he thought, he looks like a poor farmer's son, and I don't want a poor farmer's son to marry my daughter. I don't care what I promised. She said, well, I know I did promise that, but you see, there's something else you have to do for me first. And Hans said, oh, I would like to do something for you, your majesty. What would you like me to do? And he said, well, you have to build me a boat. Yes, a boat that moves as easily over the land as it does over the water. Yes, that's what you have to do. And Hans said, okay, I can build a boat. And he went home. And he told his father and his brothers what the king had told him to do. And Hans and his brothers liked to build boats sometimes so that they could, sail on the little ponds and lakes and rivers near their house. So they all knew how to build boats. And the father said, Hans, you can't do that. Your brother will do it. Yes, your oldest brother will do it. The oldest son said, well, I can do that. Yep. Then I can marry the princess, I could be a king, and everybody will know who's the boss. So the next morning, the eldest son went out into the woods to build a boat. And he started building his boat. Long about lunchtime, the little Iron Man arrived. And he came out of the woods and he said, what you building? And the eldest son said, what's it to you? Wooden platters for the kitchen. Ah, so it is and so shall it be, said the old man. And he walked back into the woods. Well, Hans's elder brother, the oldest brother, he finished that boat right about as the sun went down, and he went home for a little bit of a rest before he would take his boat to the castle the next morning. When he got up the next morning, he walked into the woods and found a lot of piles of wooden platters for the kitchen, all over the clearing where he had left his boat. The boat was gone, just lots of wooden platters for the kitchen. So he went home and he told his father what had happened. And his father said, well, you must have done something wrong. So your other brother will do it in the morning. All right. So the next morning, the second brother went out to the woods and started building a boat. And right long about lunchtime, the little Iron Man arrived. What you building? What do you care? None of your business. Wooden bowls for the kitchen. And he finished building the boat right about dark. And he went home. And when he came back the next morning, the clearing was filled with nothing but stacks of wooden bowls for the kitchen. No boat. So the next morning, Hans didn't even ask his father. He just went out to the woods to start building his own boat. He started building the boat, and long about lunchtime, the little Iron Man arrived, and he said, what you building? And Hans said, oh, I'm making a boat. See, it has to sail as easily over the land as it does over the water. not sure if I can make that happen, but I'm sure gonna try. Because see, if I can do this, the king says I get to marry the princess, and then I could maybe become king someday. And I don't know if I'll be good at it, but I'd sure like to try. And the little Iron Man said, so it is, and so shall it be. And he left. And Hans finished building that boat right about dark, and he went home and he got a nice sleep. And when he got up the next morning, he went out and he climbed into his boat and he started rowing. And he rowed that boat over the land to the king's palace. And the king saw him coming. The king was not very happy to see him coming, but the king had had a little bit of time to come up with another impossible task for Hans to do. So when Hans arrived in his boat, he said, there, your majesty, I brought you the boat that you wanted. Can I marry the princess now and try to be the king someday? And he said, I have one more thing I need you to do for me, Hans. Oh, of course, your majesty, I would like to do something for you. What would you like me to do? He said, I need you to take these 100 rabbits out into the meadow, let them eat the grass, and then at the end of the day, you need to bring back all 100 rabbits. And if you can do that, then I will let you marry the princess. Have you ever walked around outside and seen a rabbit and you walked near it? What does it do? Runs away, right? As fast as it can go, it runs away. And Hans knew this. So Hans took those 100 rabbits in their little cages out to the woods, out to the meadow rather, and he put them down in the meadow, and he opened the doors of the cages, and they all hopped out and they started eating the grass. He was doing okay. They were wandering a little bit, but they weren't too bad. But Hans was a little worried about how he was going to keep all 100 rabbits there the whole time. And while he was wondering about this, he heard a noise, and when he turned around, there was the little Iron Man coming up to him. He said, Hans, what you doing? And Hans said, well, you see, I have to watch all of these 100 rabbits and not lose any of them. If I lose any of them, then I won't be able to marry the princess. I have to bring them all back at the end of the day. And the little Iron Man said, well, that's not hard, Hans. Let me give you a hand. Here, I've got this little silver whistle. You blow this whistle, all those rabbits will come running right back. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the help. So Hans held onto that little whistle, and when the rabbits would start to get a little too far away, just and they would all come back. Well, after a couple hours out there in the sun, and he was kind of having fun. He was singing songs. He was watching the rabbits and getting some sun, enjoying himself. He saw somebody coming down out of the palace. And as he got a little closer, he realized it was the princess. And he was looking at her. She's really pretty. And she has a nice face. I kind of think I like her a little bit. And as the princess was coming down out of the castle, she was looking at him thinking, he has a really nice face and he seems to be very kind. I kind of think I like him. But she had a job to do. And she knew that she had to do her job. And because she was a princess, she had been taught not to show all of her feelings on her face. So she went down to Hans, and she made sure she didn't show any of her feelings on her face, and she said, Hans, my father has a very important guest, and he wants rabbit stew for dinner. I need you to give me one of the rabbits so that we can make rabbit stew for my father's very important guest. And Hans said, but if I give you one of the rabbits, then I won't have all of them at the end of the day, and then your father won't let me marry you. I'm sorry, princess, but I cannot give you one of the rabbits. But Hans, my father wants one of the rabbits. But princess, I'm sorry, I can't give you one. But Hans, I would like you to give me one of the rabbits, please. Well, since you said please, okay. So Hans picked up one of the rabbits and he put it in the princess's little apron, and she started up the hill, and Hans thought, well, now what am I going to do? So at the end of the day, I'm not going to have 100 rabbits left. Then I'm not going to be able to marry the princess, and I won't get to try to be king. Then he remembered the little whistle he had gotten from the little Iron Man. I wonder. And sure enough, that little rabbit jumped right out of the princess's apron and came running right back to Hans. And the princess turned around and she looked at Hans and she said, I won't ask you for another rabbit, but my father is not going to be happy. And she went back in the palace. And at the end of the day, Hans, and he walked up to the palace with all of those rabbits, and they all gathered, and they came in, and the king said, count the rabbits. And so they counted the rabbits, and there were 100. And the king said, count them again. And they counted them again, and there were 100. And the king said, no, count them again. And he made them count the rabbits 6 times. 6 times. There were 100 rabbits every single time. And when he said, count them again, the chancellor said, King, Your Majesty, I really don't think counting them a 7th time is going to change the number of the rabbits. There are 100 rabbits there. But if, Your Majesty, you really don't want this young man to marry the princess, I have an idea. Send him to the man-eating griffin and tell him that you want a feather from the man-eating griffin. And so the king said, that's a good idea. He'll never come back from that. Hans, I have one more thing I need you to do. Oh, yes, Your Majesty, I would like to help you. What can I do for you? I need you to go to the far-off place where the man-eating griffin lives, and I need you to bring me 1 feather from the man-eating griffin. Okay, Your Majesty, I'll go right now, shall I? Yes, you do that. All right, then, I'll go right now. So Hans left, and the princess, she was kind of sad to see him go because she kind of liked Hans. He seemed nice. And time passed, and one day there was a knock at the door of the castle, and there was a man standing there, dressed all in very nice clothing, with several servants standing behind him carrying boxes and bags of gold. And he said, I should like to see the king. And then the guard said, well, of course you can. He looked like a prince. And so they took him to the king. And the king said, well, stranger, what can we do for you? And the visitor said, well, Your Majesty, I was doing something for you. I brought you this, the feather from the man-eating griffin. You sent me to fetch it. Did you forget? And then they realized it was Hans. He had been on many adventures, and he had gotten much gold and a lot of silver. He'd earned it all while he was traveling and saved some people and gotten some money. So many adventures. He started telling them some of them, and they said, no, that's okay. Hans, save it for the wedding feast. Because the princess, you see, she had convinced her father that he needed to keep his promise when Hans came back. And he knew that his daughter was right. Kings really should keep their promises. And so the prince, or the princess and Hans got married, and there were 1,000 people at the wedding. It was a big, huge party, and Hans was very excited to see his father and his brothers, and he was able to give them hugs and give them some money and tell them how much he loved them and how much he had missed them. But the one person he never did see again was that little Iron Man. And he always said if he ever saw him again, he was going to thank him a lot because he and the princess were very happy together. And you know what? When the old king died, it turns out Hans was a pretty good king after all. So that was the story of Hans and the Little Iron Man. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you come back to this Facebook page, Milledgeville Public Library IL, on Wednesday at 3 o'clock Central Daylight Time, we will be telling another story, and this time, I know, let's tell the story of how the chipmunk got his stripes. We'll see you on Wednesday. Bye.